Very smart.
Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle joining you this morning, and I'm talking to a young activist. And actually, Andrew, I didn't even ask you how you want to be introduced. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself, and tell us how this conversation came to be.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sharon. Really excited to be talking to you today. Yeah, my name's Andrew Wessels. I appreciate being called being called young. I am to date myself, 41 years old. So somewhere in the middle there. But I appreciate that. It feels good. I'm the strategy director of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. We're a group of about 8,500, primarily Eaton fire survivors, but we also have a large number of Palisades fire survivors who are part of our community. And I guess specifically today, I'm here. I was a co-author of the report "Fix What You Broke," which was our initial response to Edison's draft protocol that we presented at a press conference, submitted to Edison. And really kind of details an analysis, kind of an outside analysis of Edison's plan, specifically geared towards our community, so that the community could understand it, understand what it meant for them, and be able to kind of understand whether or not it was a good program for themselves. And just one last thing I'll say before we dive fully in is the title "Fix What You Broke" probably also indicates our kind of the results of our analysis as well. That as we analyzed it, our position was that it was not going to adequately you know fix what happened in the community. Last little background in my real life. This is not this is just additional volunteer work that I do on top of my real life. I'm an Altadena survivor as well. I work as VP of Strategy and Operations for Rebind Publishing in my kind of actual real life job. And I'm the father of two children, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And yeah.
Gosh, where do you get the time to do any of this stuff? You're with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. So let me just remind people what we're talking about, what fire, because this could be heard who knows where this is going to be picked up. But 11 months ago in Southern California, it just seemed like all of Southern California was ablaze. We had the largest fires in Southern California history. And one of those fires was the Eaton Canyon fire. And Eaton Canyon is a canyon in the foothills in Los Angeles County. In fact, I live in the city of Los Angeles, but I live in the northeastern part of the city. My living room window faces the foothills of Los Angeles County, and I could actually see the flames. But I live about 5 miles away. So this Eaton Canyon fire destroyed, I don't know how many, and I think you can probably tell me, Andrew, how many homes were destroyed, lives were lost. It's 11 months ago now, and it turns out that Southern California Edison, it is being reported that they had a hand, their negligence may have caused the fire. Now, that has not been, there's been no final determination made on that, but it's looking more and more like this fire, but for Southern California Edison's negligence, this fire may not have occurred in Eaton Canyon. So, Andrew, you too lived there, you were a victim of it, and then you took it upon yourself to do this analysis and to organize these thousands of people. Tell me how the Fix What You Broke report, how did it come to be?
Yeah, so kind of initially started a few of us in the community were analyzing it for ourselves. Like the first thing that I did when the draft protocol came out is I just said, what does it mean for me and my family? And I started figuring that out, and a couple other people that I'm in contact with that kind of contribute significantly to the community. We're also doing the same and kind of we started just chatting. This doesn't seem right. This seems weird. What do you think about this? And eventually one person who I won't name them because they were not a named co-author on the report, but one person said, we need to create a report. We need to figure this out. So Joy Chen, who's the executive director, first spearheaded a community response. So we created a forum and invited people from the community to just give their feedback. So we received
And
feedback.
again, this is a response to
Mhm.
a proposal made by Southern California Edison that was sent to the people that they feel were impacted.
Yes.
Okay, so your response, you start to continue on with your response to Southern California
Yeah.
Edison's response.
Our response to so they released, let me step back for a moment. Sorry. They released what they called a draft protocol. So this was, they were saying instead of as an alternative to going to litigation, here is an alternative way that we're going to kind of offer people an opportunity to get a financial settlement. And the idea is that if you go through this program, that you get your money faster. As I think we all know, anytime you go to litigation, it's going to be slow, and lawyers are going to take a lot of the money that you get at the end. And so that's expect that to be a multi-year process. And so Edison created this program. So they didn't just create the program and start it. They released what they called a draft protocol. So they said, here's our first draft. Now we're going to take community input. And so we started, looking at this, and so and then one of the things we noticed is the Edison controlled the community input section very, very, very heavily. So they had a few kind of what they called like town halls where you could go and learn more about the program and give feedback, but they were very limited. They occurred just a few days after the draft protocol was released. So before anyone could really digest what was in there, limited seats. And then the questions in there were very, very, very limited. So if you actually answered their questions as they came, you would not actually be able to provide a full scope of feedback. So, for example, in their draft protocol, children were valued, the non-economic damages for children were valued at half or even a quarter of what an adult has. However, there was no question in their feedback form that allowed you to actually respond to that.
Okay, so children, you talk about the non-economic values.
Mhm.
Give us an example of what is a non-economic value.
Yeah, so the non-economic, so there's basically two categories of damages here. There's the economic damages, so you burn down my house, a tree in my yard burned down these things that we can attach a direct economic value to. But then, in settlements like this, there's also non-economic damages. And these can, range. I'm going to answer this as a non-lawyer. I might use incorrect terminology here because I know some of these terms have very specific legal meanings. But it's, the trauma of, having to flee your home, the fear of doing that, the I think, one of the terms that's been used is annoyance that since the fire, we people have had to move constantly to temporary homes. Have had to deal with mountains of paperwork as well. So it's this kind of also this annoyance. As well. So there's various factors. We don't know what Edison considered. They've never made their kind of formulas public for how they determined non-economic value, but at a large sense, it's to make you whole for basically the disruption to your life in some form.
Okay, so in one way we could say to make you whole for the tangible things that you lost, as well as the non-tangibles, like relationships or time that you got to spend in the park, where you let your dog run and play. Okay.
Yeah.
So this report came out. Now, mind you, we're having this conversation today on November the 12th, 2025, which is 11 months after this whole horrible tragedy took place. And when this proposal was sent out by Southern California Edison, how many months had passed since the actual fire?
So approximately 8.5 months. When we had the press conference responding to Edison, it was, I don't remember if it was exactly the 9 month anniversary, but it was the 9 month anniversary, give or take a couple of days. So they released it at about the 8.5 month mark.
Now, before that 8.5 month mark, had you had any interaction with Southern California Edison that they initiated?
Functionally, no. I hadn't had any, and there was kind of they, had released a few weeks before they had said we are going to do this. We are going to release a compensation plan, but everything was just kind of information going out, and there was no community collaboration that I'm aware of.
Interesting. Now, the community itself, let's give the listener or the watcher a sense of the size of this community. I don't know if you know the numbers off the top of your head, how many homes were burned down or otherwise impacted?
I could be slightly incorrect, trying to remember all these things, but it was approximately 6,000 homes were burned down. And approximately six, to understand the scope of damage beyond that is a little challenging. But I know there's at least 6,000 other homes that were damaged to varying degrees. But it's very challenging to really understand the scope of damage because in the aftermath of the fire, I believe it was Caltech did some analyses and identified lead dust that was likely deposited by the fire as far away as Highland Park, which, if for people who are not familiar with the geography of Los Angeles and Northeast Los Angeles, that's I believe about 10-12 miles away from
Is
the
it? Okay.
actual fire.
So I was just going to mention that that I live in Mount Washington, which is Highland Park adjacent. And I could see the flames from my windows, but in the days following the fire, there was this light black soot that kind of covered everything in our house.
Yeah, so it's possible, this is beyond my expertise. We actually, when we evacuated from the fire, we evacuated to a friend's home in Mount Washington initially. And yeah, and the home was just getting filled with smoke because, we're up on the hillside, we're watching it.
That's right.
And we actually then all of us, the family that housed us that first night, had a newborn baby. And so we then all subsequently evacuated from there just because of the smoke for the children and evacuated up the coast there. But that was my first stop post fire
Yeah,
as well.
to my community. And we didn't really consider evacuating because our cat was 23 years old. And but anyway, so let's get back to the real issue here. So Southern California Edison, given that at least 6,000 homes were destroyed and there was loss of life. Now, there has been additional loss of life after the day of the fire, but the people who died immediately, either during the fire or within a day of the fire, how many people lost their lives then?
So I know the kind of quote unquote the direct deaths due to the fire I believe are reported at 19. I don't know if that includes anyone who kind of, shortly thereafter passed away directly due to the fire. I know from my understanding is that it gets difficult to understand, the additional deaths of a traumatic event. I think in general, everyone kind of understands that deaths do increase after traumatic events like this. And one of the ways that can be calculated is by taking, the expected deaths if nothing had happened based on kind of historical data, and then actually charting the number of deaths that do happen. And there's in events like this, there's typically a delta, an increase. And so there's, an ability to at least say that increase is likely primarily due to the thing. I'm not sure if those there are results of that. It's been reported that hundreds of people have passed away since the fire. I don't know enough to know how much that differs from the norm. What I do know, kind of related to this, is that mental health professionals who are supporting the community, especially over the last few weeks, have been reporting an increase in suicidal ideation as community members start running out of funds for their temporary housing, as we start approaching the both the 1 year anniversary of the fire as well as the holidays. And so there's a lot of challenges ahead for the community, and why Edison's plan is so important, and why the community is so frustrated and pushing back so hard about this, because it's really important as we get into the holiday season and we get into the Department of Angels, a nonprofit trying to support the rebuild, has reported that upwards of 50% of fire victims are going to lose housing in the next few months. So this is, we're at really a dire situation. And, you mentioned Edison. Edison is it's very strange. Edison has stopped fighting the lawsuit about whether they're liable for the fire, but has stopped short of the full investigation is not done, but Edison is no longer fighting that they did not do this. So yeah, at this point, Edison has functionally, in layman's terms, admitted to causing the fire.
Right. So here we have a private utility that has stopped fighting any has stopped investing any time or any resources into avoiding what clearly looks like negligence. And in the meantime, has not reached out to the community until 8 months after. And during those 8 months, the people who have lost their homes have received little to no financial compensation. Tell me about your experience.
So, yeah, kind of, the initial thing is everyone's supposed to get insurance. But as anyone who's kind of followed the story closely, insurance is not fulfilling the policy contracts. 70% of fire victims between the Palisades and Eaton fires have reported undue delays and denials. The Department of Insurance has actually opened up an investigation into State Farm, the state's largest home insurance provider, into potentially illegal claims practices related to how they're handling the Palisades and Eaton fire claims. And so, we community members have been having trouble accessing the insurance that we've paid for that is supposed to support this. And then Edison has also done absolutely nothing to date to support victims of the fire. For me personally, I've had a lot of challenges with insurance. I'm a State Farm policyholder, and at various points, State Farm was not processing any of my reimbursements. I had to wait upwards of 150 days to receive reimbursement for my temporary housing. This put me, upwards of $40,000 into debt in order to have temporary housing for my family in the aftermath of the fire. And this is while State Farm was also simultaneously refusing to review or delaying any review of kind of all the documentation of the work needed to get us back into our home. So they just did nothing. They didn't pay us. They didn't review anything. And so we had to really kind of fight that, and one, go into debt, and then two, to really push hard and fight that. And so it's been a big challenge. Our home is standing. It is covered in lead dust, upwards of 20 times the EPA limit in certain sections of the home. So it's incredibly unsafe for anyone, much less a 2-year-old, to be in. And to date, nothing has happened on the home. We are still waiting for State Farm to complete their investigation. It's been 10 months, and yeah, nothing has moved forward functionally. And so we're, burning through our policy, our temporary housing allotment while we just wait, twiddle our thumbs and wait for State Farm to decide things, um, decide things, decide things like whether or not we need to follow California laws around how to remove the lead from our home. It took us 3 months to actually convince State Farm that California has laws about lead abatement and that we should follow them. Our adjuster has never actually said the words Title 17 or Title 8 in any of our correspondence. They've avoided mentioning or referring to any of these laws that we are required to follow to clean our home. And so they've produced reports that and scopes of work that don't follow California laws on lead abatement. So this is all to say insurance is not doing what they're supposed to do, and Edison, the actual cause of the fire, is also not doing really much of anything, especially in the short term, to make good or to make survivors whole.
This is amazing. People who have not had these kinds of experiences, I think, just take for granted that a reputable insurance company like State Farm would do what they say, what their commercials say they're going to do. It's actually not surprising to me because we've been publishing the LA Progressive for 18 years. We understand that corporations have no interest in communities and regular people. The only interest they have in them is to be able to extract wealth from them and provide as little in return as possible. And that has been my experience with insurance companies. And now we clearly see that the same is true with Southern California Edison. Now, you guys had a town hall recently, and I attended this town hall meeting. In addition to you being on the panel and several community members, Pedro Pizarro, the CEO of Edison International, was invited and accepted the invitation to attend that forum. And then about 48 to 72 hours before the day of the event, he chose not to show up. I understand, and you and I were talking a little bit before we started to the podcast or the recording, that Pedro Pizarro has actually had a conversation with Tavis Smiley, and Tavis Smiley has been so engaged. And I want you to talk to me about how Tavis Smiley, KBLA, the media, how is that impacting the organization, your organization, and others who were victims of this terrible, terrible thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just really thank Tavis and James and everyone at KBLA for their kind of, ongoing support and just kind of all of the attention that is put on this event. And, I think, at some point in people's, lives, they go through kind of a challenging event, whether, maybe it's not as big as a hurricane or a fire to this degree, but one of those events where something terrible happens in the short term, and there's a lot of kind of attention and support given to you in that the kind of immediate aftermath. It could be, the loss of a loved one. And for the first few weeks, you receive this kind of onslaught of support. And that's what, kind of what happened in the immediate aftermath of the fire. People might remember, seeing, there were just an overwhelming amount of donations being dropped off at, stadiums and things like that. And just kind of this great outpouring of support, just to make sure that everyone had clothes, that everyone had food. And, these sorts of things happen in those first few weeks. But as we get to this, 9, 10, 11-month period, it's harder to get news coverage of some of these things because new terrible things have happened in the world that warrant attention as well. And so as we kind of get this far. It's it's normal, but it's hard to be like that support's not there, that attention's not there, but we're still fighting. We're not this story is not done. And I really just thank KBLA and Havis and James Farr for continuing to discuss this and continuing to cover it, because it really does mean a lot. And I think it shows how this can change the game. I mean, because Edison, pulled out of the event, and probably thought at the moment that there was going to be no blowback, that they could just continue moving forward. Who cares? And the attention and the community is listening, and people beyond just the survivor community are obviously listening and putting pressure, which brings Edison, back to the table. I don't know what the final outcome or change for survivors ends up being, but it shows that attention does change things, and that those giving voice does change things.
Yeah, in the 20 years or so that we've been publishing the LA Progressive, and we are information activists. So my husband and I, we are the publisher and the editor and the founders of the LA Progressive. We're often in the streets with other activists working on all kinds of issues. When a perfect example is after the murder of George Floyd, we had really the largest marches in human history. And yet the marches actually caused movement by the legislative body. It did start to change policy. However, when the marches die down and the papers are no longer the headlines, then the policies kind of fall by the wayside. And that is what happened with the George Floyd Act. So we, as independent news outlets, we're always trying to get these messages out in front of people. So anyone that's listening to this, this interview is going to be embedded in an article that I wrote about fix what you broke. And it talks about this fantastic 51-page comprehensive report that was spearheaded by Andrew Wessels and the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. It's so important that you share this content. And we provide you with plenty of opportunities by sharing through social media, sending it as an attachment in an email. People need to understand that here we are. I said 11 months in. Andrew says 10 months after the fire. The fire was January the 7th. And today it's November the 12th. So we're getting into the 11th month, and people have not been in any way made whole. Not only had they not been made whole, but there appears to be no intention of ever making them whole. So
Can I add
please.
one thing here? So what is kind of remarkable we kind of vaguely a little bit touched on this in that report, but we didn't even realize the scope of it until after we published the report. And we are soon, probably sometime this week, going to publish a kind of a final response to Edison's final plan. So again, a reminder that that 51-page report is for Edison's draft proposal. And so there are changes in between Edison's draft and then the final version that came out a few weeks ago. We're preparing a report for that. But what's really interesting is that of kind of recent fires, especially since California started what's called the Wildfire Fund, which is there to support utilities and survivors in the event of a utility caused fire. Every other investor-owned utility in California, this is PG&E and SDG&E, has advanced emergency relief to fire survivors while litigation was pending. I'm going to say this again, that every other investor-owned utility in California recently in this situation has advanced emergency relief to fire survivors while litigation is pending. Edison is not. They are the first of the major investor-owned utilities to not advance survivors emergency relief while all of this, while kind of litigation is pending, because this compensation plan that Edison has put forth, to get that money, you have to sign away all rights to sue Edison ever into the future. Your heirs cannot bring litigation. It's a blanket waiver that absolves Edison of any future legal liabilities. And Edison has stated that this is how they're doing things. This is how they want to do things, but that is a divergence from the norm. Every other utility recently in this situation has advanced emergency relief, and as I said earlier, it's dire out there. It's getting dire as 50% of survivors start losing access to their temporary housing as we enter the holidays, which is going to be emotionally and psychologically challenging. As you know, there are going to be families that go into the holidays for the first time in 50, 60, 70 years, not at their homes, not at these homes that are the center of their communities, and not able to do that. My home, our Christmas tree from last year is still up in the home. Our Christmas tree from last year is still up in the home. So every time I have to go into that home, the first thing I see when I open the door is that Christmas tree. And so this is going to be a very challenging period. And Edison, instead of trying to support the community and ensure that people are safely housed, ensure people are made whole, the very first move is, how can we manage and mitigate our risk?
That's right. That's right. Before we close, I want you to bring up a point that you brought up the other night at the town hall, where you talked about the Rand Corporation and the contribution that they made to Southern California Edison's proposal.
Yeah, so one of I try not to get into the weeds here, but in anyone who reads Edison's proposal, it becomes very clear that there's a lot of formulas and a lot of work that you don't see that then generates these numbers or formulas that you see in the actual proposal there. And so basically one of the key formulas is, how do you determine the value of a home after it burns? And the kind of fancy term for this is diminution in value, or decline in value. And so one of the things and this is getting in all the legalese, is Edison has to create a kind of a system for doing this. And then that system has to be shared with some administrators. And in this process, Edison, to support that their formula is acceptable and good business practice, they sent it to the Rand Corporation. And the Rand Corporation is, a major research wing that does a million different things, kind of a research consultancy, so to speak. If anyone's not familiar with Rand, they have a huge building out in Santa Monica that you might, if you're out there just south of the 3rd Street Promenade, you've probably driven by it before, by one of their buildings. But so Rand took a look at this formula. They used what's a machine learning model to generate this number, and there's a lot of data that nobody has access to. But Rand was given access to this, and they produced a report. And the basic takeaway from the report is that Rand said, this is the data is good data. The outcomes of the formula are producing expected numbers. And so this quote unquote appears to be working. And basically what that means is that, you wouldn't have a $1 million home that suddenly accidentally, because of the different things in the formula, suddenly gets valued at like $3 million. Or a $3 million home doesn't suddenly get valued at $500,000 because of some weird aspect of this complicated, weird formula. But if someone goes, and Edison published the Rand report, it's on their website, so anyone can download it. And if you go to the very, very, very end, you go to the conclusion, and you go to the very end of the conclusion, the last sentence of this of Rand's report says in plain language that what they did not do is actually look to see if the numbers corresponded in any way to the cost of rebuilding. So this formula is designed to say, here's how much we should pay someone to rebuild their home. Rand Corporation says, oh, it looks like it all makes sense to us, but let's just not look at whether it corresponds to the actual costs of rebuilding. So what that means, what they actually did is they looked inside and they said, this is a precise model. It's not going to put out a number that it shouldn't put out. But we have no idea if that number corresponds to the actual costs. So it's precise, but we have no idea if it's accurate. It might be accurate. It could very well be. I have no idea, but we have no idea if it's accurate. And Rand stopped short of actually looking to say, so they can't say that whatever number gets spit out is going to in any way correspond to rebuilding costs. And what I think is very important is that people are farther along in the insurance process, and insurance is using very similar models to determine how they pay out people to rebuild homes there. And all of those numbers are falling far, far, far short of the bids that people are getting from architects and contractors. And so we already have seen months and months and months of proof that these sorts of models are underbidding, undervaluing the costs. And so the fact that Edison had no interest and specifically told Rand to stop short of doing that next step of analysis, I think is just very important there. So we have no idea if those numbers correspond to what they're actually supposed to correspond to. It doesn't really matter if it's precise as long as it's accurate. But they decided to say, we don't want it to be accurate, or we don't care if it's accurate as long as it's precise.
That's right. So the only thing that they're standing is the fidelity of the actual calculation, not whether or not the final number is able to result in the survivors being made whole, being able to rebuild, being able to live in a way that's similar to the way that they were living before these fires happened in the same kind or in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. Another kind of way that I put it when I talk to some of my kind of, more activist friends, so this would be for anyone listening who's kind of a little bit more kind of in academia, maybe, is it's the difference between theory and praxis. Theory is we can talk about what we should do or what's the right thing to do, but praxis is actually going out there, putting it into practice, right? Going out and doing it. And there's always a difference between those things. So Edison created a theory for valuing how to compensate people for rebuilding their homes, but they ignored the praxis side of it. They have no idea if it's actually going to work. But the thing is, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I know we're kind of hitting time, but I want to hit one more point just to show why this is so important. So the LA Times a few weeks ago released a report that looked at the 5 biggest fires between 2017 and 2020. So these are all fires that are 5 or more years ago. Only 38% of homes in those 5 fires have been rebuilt. And the only communities of those, the only communities that successfully rebuilt had fast and fair access to insurance, which we already know is not happening in the Eaton and Palisades fires. And when utilities were at fault, they also had fast and fair access to compensation from utilities. And if those two things don't happen, then the community doesn't rebuild. We're already missing on the first. And Edison's compensation plan falls far short of fully compensating people for what they either, the damages to them or what is needed to rebuild, whichever way you look at it. And so it looks like we're going to miss on both of those for the Eaton fire. The Palisades fire does not have access to the utilities because they were not at fault, but they are also being failed by insurance. And in that report, there's a note that communities that successfully rebuilt had a completed home by the 10-month anniversary of the fire.
Wow.
Altadena does not have a completed home, and we just passed the 10-month mark. So
Right.
this is, again, kind of just to drive home the sort of dire straits and why it was so important for Tavis and KBLA to do that town hall last week why we felt it was so important to publish this report and to publicize it as much as possible, and why we're kind of out there fighting, because we're starting to miss milestones of the rebuild. We have a lot of homes that are getting really close. So, I think we might be able to, I think there's still a path to success here, but it's really going to be dependent on what does Edison do and what does insurance do.
Thank you, Andrew Wessels, for your dogged determination to get this report out there, for sitting with me today, for taking care of your lovely 2-year-old and 6-year-old. And just thank you. So if anyone wants to read this, it's called Fix What You Broke. I have a link to it in the article on the LA Progressive, and we'll see how this all pans out with Southern California Edison.
Thank you so much for covering this, Sharon. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Same here. Okay, so long.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below, and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.